It's Monday, and we are having a meeting between President Trump and Ukrainian President Zelenskyy that's going to happen today. A lot of the press, as we predicted, was going to say this was a big failure because they didn't decide to report the news beforehand, which was going into it saying, hey, this is not going to be a peace talk. This is not going to be the decision-making time. This is to get to round two. This is maybe just to get to have them eventually meet together.
Right.
Nothing was ever going to come of this of extreme substance. But of course, that's not how the media decided to spin it.
That's right. And of course, as the Secretary of State Marco Rubio made the rounds on the Sunday shows yesterday, he was trying to lay out for everyone, as President Trump said before the meeting, he wasn't going there to negotiate on behalf of Ukraine. He was going to try to get them to the table. And this is how Secretary of State Rubio framed even what the entire point of it was. And if you see our title about what it means to negotiate a peace deal, let's go ahead and roll Byte 14.
This is about what Ukraine can accept and what Russia can accept. They both have to accept it. Otherwise, there won't be a peace deal. Okay? If there aren't concessions, if one side gets everything they want, that's called surrender. That's called the end of the war through surrender. And that's not what we're close to doing because neither side here is on the verge of surrender or anything close to it.
Well, and Jordan, I think that's the entire point here is that Russia has made gains. I don't think there's a world ever, no matter who's president, that would be able to negotiate something where Russia surrenders. And at that point, that is what the left media is calling for, is a surrender from Russia, which has been on the offensive for several years now and taken territory, that at some point, if you want the war to end, there has to be negotiation.
Yeah, and there has to be the best outcome for the parties involved. So an outcome that Ukraine can accept, an outcome that Russia can accept, and go to their domestic audiences and say, you know, we got what we needed out of this. In Ukraine's case, it was what the U.S. has got on the table is basically like an Article 5 security pact without joining NATO. And in exchange, so you'd have all of Europe and the United States backing you up against future potential Russian aggression in exchange for land and some of those territories that Russia has held in dispute since before they even invaded and took Crimea. So this is, again, the sticking point. Now, so far, Zelensky has always said when it comes to land, they're not having any discussions there. So I think what's key today is there any wiggle room there? Does he open up the door to any room in this Ukrainian region, which is primarily Russian-speaking, and has, when there have been votes taken, the people there have not been opposed to rejoining Russia. Most of them consider themselves ethnic Russians and speak the Russian language.
All of these people in the media that are pushing this narrative are not dealing with reality. And I think what's different about Marco Rubio, President Trump, the Vice President, J.D. Vance, Pete Hegseth, all of these people are actually trying to get to an outcome that is based in reality because no one believes that Ukraine will surrender and say, take our country.
Right.
But also, no one believes that Vladimir Putin will say, okay, you know what, I should have never done this, and just retreat away back to Moscow and leave nothing at the table. If you want this war to end, there are really only a few options. Either one of them is defeated militarily, and the only way that Russia would be defeated militarily would be U.S. troops on the ground fighting Russians. That would be World War III. The only other way would be concessions from both sides to be able to end the killing in the war. There's not really this third way that it seems that many on the left and senators in the United States Senate that are on the left are saying that, you know, this is ridiculous. President Trump's just going to get played by Putin again. I think the only ones that are clear-eyed with a sense of reality about this is the Trump administration saying there needs to be negotiation if we want this war to end and not expand further.
Yeah, I mean, you've got to be, if you're Russian, you've got to be able to go back to your constituents and say, this is why it was worth what we did. We got this, and it's going to secure this for the Russian people. And if you're Ukraine, you have to be able to go back and say, we were able to bring it into this conflict by getting this from the rest of the world, this agreement from the rest of the world to back us up in any future aggression. And so we're able to give these, we'll see this sliver of territory that didn't really want to be part of our country anyways. And that's how you have to then sell it to your domestic audience. And you can call it a ceasefire. And what a ceasefire means is the conflict pauses. it does not mean one side is won or another side is lost. It also doesn't mean that you all of a sudden love each other and that you're going to start working together. That just means the people stop getting killed.
Yeah, and I think that's the goal. That's always been the end goal of President Trump. Has been just people to stop dying. Now, when it comes to Ukraine and Russia, I think there's obviously Vladimir Putin brought a lot of the top businessmen on those trips. Clearly, they want to see business return, American business return to Russia after so many years now of a stalemate, if you will, where you couldn't really even do any kind of business with Russia. Russia, regardless how you felt about them politically, and I'm sure you don't feel that great about China. I'm sure you don't feel that great about a lot of countries we deal with. We're a pretty big importer-exporter for us. So you have those business guys who are going, hey, we need to wrap up this war because we need money flowing back into the country.
Yeah, no, I think it's 100% right. The economics are a huge part of this, both for Russia and Ukraine as well. And it's very tough for Ukraine to operate when it can't safely remove its minerals and oil and other natural resources. And of course, Russia has been basically banned from most of the free world.
Doing anything.
So the only actors they're working with are the Chinas, the North Koreas, Iran, and maybe to some extent India.
Not the most stable.
Not where the majority of your exports are going.
Right.
Those are countries that also export.
They have all their own
so many
stuff.
goods.
Yeah.
So yeah, I mean, like what they need to, I think, what they want to do is be able to re-enter the world economy, and again, I think in President Trump's view, this is how do you stop the killing? It doesn't mean these sides love each other. It doesn't mean there's been an actual end to the conflict. You're talking about a ceasefire and see how long that will last.
Rick, if you listen to any of the media, really, all you're hearing is that President Trump was played by Putin. No, he didn't even get anything, didn't get a ceasefire. They ignore that President Trump, even beforehand, said, my goal here is not to negotiate for Ukraine. It's to bring the two to the table. What are your thoughts, cutting through all the noise about what we saw on Friday?
Well, look, anyone who thinks that you can have one meeting and immediately have a ceasefire has never done diplomacy.
Right.
This is what the microwave generation likes. They want it instantaneously. But it's very difficult to bring about peace after you have a full-fledged war. And I will remind everybody that Donald Trump kept the peace. And that is just as difficult. Keeping the peace is very difficult. But once you delve into war, and then you have to dig yourself out. I mean, Joe Biden handed us a terrible situation where he was unwilling to talk to the Russians, and we saw massive war. It was getting worse every single month, and then suddenly President Trump comes in office and the media is like, why aren't you producing a ceasefire? Well, if it was easy, Joe Biden would have done it. And the fact of the matter is that the Democrats, and I want to say a special criticism of Senator Chris Van Hollen, because he seems to be one of the leaders of the microwave generation. He wants instantaneous solutions from Trump, while he had infinite patience for President Biden. And I don't think that that's fair. I think it's very political. It's what politicians do. They don't hold people of different parties to the same standards. But one thing that I do know is that Donald Trump is not one of these people who issues a policy and then walks away and says, I issued a policy, everybody should follow it. He's constantly watching to see if it was implemented properly, if it's working. We have never had a president who is so willing to adjust a policy very quickly when it's not working. And that's what I love. He is monitoring. Believe you me, I spoke to him over this weekend. Literally, the man is working nonstop. And what he wants to be able to do is monitor, get as much information, talk to as many people as possible. But he is absolutely in charge and sees the long term. He is a strategist. He is a negotiator. And we've got to give him a little space here.
I think when you see President Trump clearly having a long flight, flying to Alaska, having to fly back, all the things that are having to get done for these meetings, but was very clear and very upfront before this meeting saying, look, I don't plan on walking out of here with an agreement. I plan on walking out of here, hopefully getting us to round 2 of a meetings where now we'll meet with Zelensky and hopefully we can get them to the table. Of course, though, the media had to run with this crazy narrative that the goal was to walk out of there with it all said and done. Of course, would everyone have loved that? Would have been amazing? Sure. But it simply wasn't going to be the case, and we knew that going in, but that didn't stop the headlines. And the headlines coming in from, what is it now, Will? It's not MSNBC anymore.
MS Now.
MS Now, my source now. It didn't stop that narrative from being what they've tried to push this weekend, which was couldn't get anything done. Nothing happened. All we did was bow down to Putin, when clearly that's not the case and was never the spoken goal of this entire summit.
Look, I've been in tens of thousands of diplomatic negotiations, and let me just tell you how they go. You put one side in a room and you talk to them, and you figure out what's their lowest kind of common denominator, or what will they accept, where will they move, and where are they absolutely not willing to go. And then you have to go to the other side and listen to theirs, and then you have to come up with really creative solutions. That's diplomacy. And it all starts once you get them to agree and say, okay, I'm going to take a little bit of a faith effort jump. I'm going to step out. I'm going to believe you. I'm going to try to believe the other side. We're both going to come together with some faith. And at that moment, when there's a handshake or when there's an agreement, that's when the real diplomacy has to begin. To hold it, you have to go back, and the same people who negotiated the peace have to be the ones that hold it to account, because you know the vulnerabilities. You know exactly where they bent, where they moved, where they didn't really want to move, but they did. And so they're going to be a little sensitive and jumpy on watching that moment break. And so I think that if you haven't done diplomacy, you should take a step back and trust the people who are actually doing the negotiations, and recognize that these things are incredibly difficult. We didn't get into this situation overnight. We're not going to get out of it overnight.
Well, and Rick, and that's one of the reasons we love having you on the broadcast to talk about diplomacy, because I feel like there is such a breakdown in our culture about understanding the process of diplomacy, understanding the outcomes and goals of diplomatic relations and meetings and summits. And the Democrats in the Senate, as you've mentioned, are adding more fuel to that fire, that breakdown of the education of the public of how this works by, and the media as well, with Margaret Brennan going after Secretary of State Rubio now, by saying that, they're not going to get this ceasefire. In negotiations, people have to give something up. And that is what the point that the Secretary of State made, is that if you don't give anything up, then one side is surrendering. And when the Democrats push this narrative that they're trying to set the expectation for the country and the world that Russia will surrender, not negotiate. And that's just a dangerous position to start your entire worldview and mindset from, is that if you're going into negotiations expecting a surrender from a side, then you are never going to get anywhere. So they're doing a disservice to the country as well, I feel like.
Look, a lot of these people who are black and white and really neoconish, they don't understand the implications of what they're doing. Remember, Joe Biden put us in a terrible position by creating a hostility with Russia, not talking with Putin. So we have to now build a little goodwill. We have to be able to make sure that both sides understand that we want peace, that we're going to do, the middle guy is going to be the hard negotiator. It still is all about Ukraine and Russia. But the facilitator, President Trump, is somebody who has an enormous role by pushing, prodding, and also letting them know that we're listening and we want a solution. Now, look, the critics, the black and white types who just want war or peace and they don't understand how to get there, they're going to complain about everything. They're going to complain that the facilitator is being too nice to one side. I'm super comfortable with that. President Trump is comfortable with the critics. I think if you want peace, you're going to have a leader who steps up, takes criticism that they were either too tough or too weak, or depending on the side, just getting the complaints constantly. Sure. I think that's okay as long as you bring about peace and you stop the death and destruction.
With only about a minute left, Rick, what should people be looking for? I mean, I think that was one of the big stories coming out of the meeting with Putin. What should they be looking for with this meeting with Zelenskyy? What's good? What's bad? What are positive movements that they should be keeping their eyes on in terms of the way the administrations are going to be speaking?
Look, I would say that it's not going to be solved today. We're going to have to go back and speak to the Russians. So you want momentum. You want to be able to have a progress a little bit better today than you did yesterday. And so at the end of today, after they hear from Zelensky and the European leaders, I think there's going to have to be a conversation again with Putin to say, here's where I think we might have some movement or some wiggle room.